We're going to pick up again. So hopefully you've had a chance to work on your painting. And where we are now is I have worked through, let's see, he's still getting big glare. So I've worked through the water. That's where we ended the last time. So I just refreshed the palette. Today's Thursday, so that palette lasted for 5 days. That's pretty good because I've been painting every day. So I just put a fresh palette on. I'm looking at my water. I'm looking at the photo. I'm seeing what I want to do. And I'm still not quite ready for getting the foliage on that tree. I'm going to just do a little bit more on the water, and then we're going to focus on how you would set that foliage in. So I'm going to move my canvas to the horizontal position because, again, I believe it's easier to paint those verticals than it is to paint horizontals. So that's if that doesn't work for you, then don't do it. Just because I do something does not mean that that is absolutely going to work the best for everybody. So what I want to clarify is I want to get in here, and this should sparkle, and right now it doesn't. So I want to enhance some of those darks. So I'm going to take a brush load of the glazing liquid, a brush load of my ink. I made a big mess on my palette. So even though this product I mentioned acts like ink, it's still so thin that, like ink, when I try to put it on my palette, it just runs all over the place. So I could have grabbed that if I wanted. I'm going to grab some of that umber, the brown. I'm going to take some of that primary blue. And I'm not liking that color at all. I'm going to grab some of the, and I just went blank on the name. What's the matter with me? So again, it's a historic color. You'd think I'd be able to remember that. Indian yellow, that's one of your optional colors. It is a transparent yellow. It's like a golden yellow. I'm going to take that. Often it will add a bit of, I'll take a green that I've made using ink, because I always use some ink in green. Remember, I did ink, a little bit of that primary blue, probably too much of the primary blue, and some of the Indian yellow. And I'm looking, and I'm still not really wild about that color. It's just a little too artificial looking for me. So, and you're making some of these judgments by just looking. So put a little bit more of that brown in. And again, it's an optional color, but that green gold. I was trying to use just the colors you have, but that green gold is sort of magic. Okay, so I've got a pretty dark. I don't know how much. Take another dab of ink. So I'm just looking at the photo. I'm trying to remember when I'm out in nature. I take a walk every day. You take walks, you do things. Try to think about what you experience. So once again, I'm holding my hand. I tend to do that to brace it. And I'm thinking about those reflections. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm going to start to enhance some of these. I don't need this to be, as I say constantly, there's no need to try to pretend that whatever is there is something you need to copy. All that is a reference. If we were outside, you couldn't copy what you saw. You would be trying to capture that sense of what you saw. Well, a photo isn't necessarily, just because you have this tangible, static piece of reference doesn't mean you're copying it. Just pretend. And in reality, you would have taken this picture. You would have been outside. So you're actually thinking, oh, what was it like? That's right, that was that beautiful day. And it was reflecting those deep shadows from the tree. So right now I just push my brush up towards the top where I see more brown on my palette. And as I get closer to the shore, I notice it gets darker and it gets to have a little bit more of that brown. So I'm really going to push. I mean, when I look at it, it reads almost black. So if I wanted, I could even pull more of that ink in. And I'm overlapping the shore, because remember, or the bank. I'll paint the bank in, so I don't have to try to pretend that this is, you know, a coloring book and I don't want to go over those lines. Okay, so I've got some of that nicer contrast in there, and I'm going to just go in here and I want it to be a little bit darker. I'm going to pick a tiny bit of another optional color, sorry, but it's a purplish blue. It's called Smalt. Because I see in here there's an optical transparency to the way it's reflecting color. And that Smalt, that little bit of a purple adds some of that optic. And I'm just going to bounce that through. I'd already done this when we were working the sketch. I'm just enhancing it a little bit. I see there's a little bit of rhythm in the water that almost has a curve there. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing around with that a little bit. And notice I have my brush just flowing. I'm not trying to do these little like tight marks. So again, it should be fun. You should feel like, oh, this is relaxing. It's almost therapeutic because you are trying to tune in to what it is that's that experience when you're outside. And if you're somebody who likes being out, you probably are pretty well tuned and you notice things and you say, oh my gosh, the air, the light, the coolness, the breeze. Well, we can't put those things physically, those central experiences into this, but you could create a light and a color experience that does trigger those kind of memories. So that's getting a little better. I like that better. As the reflection moves away from me into the middle, it's catching more light. So I'm going to grab some of that primary yellow. I'm not changing all my color. I just moved off to the side a little bit. I'm going to take a tiny bit of that Smalt blue, the purple blue again. If I wasn't going to use that, what I'd probably do is the faintest grab of the red, just a tiny little grab of the red, and a very, very barely a grab of the primary blue, just to try to give it that little bit of an optical, so it isn't quite, it's dulled, plus it's getting a little of that purple in it. I put another little brushload of black, and I'm just making these choices based on what I see. It's not quite as dark as what's down there. The thing I can do is I can add more medium, more glazing liquid. That makes it go on more transparent. So then I'm going to come in here. Perfect. As soon as I put that down, I see it's transparent, which means it's going to read lighter. And I just go ahead and I start to enhance where I had some of those patterns already in place. I'm going to do that little thing where I take my brush and go like that, and I get multiple bristles sticking out, and I use that to help me get that linear quality. And while I have them cooperating so really well right now, I'm bouncing and I'm not trying to make those lines solid, because if I actually get this to cooperate, then sometimes I'll just bounce those around to sort of heighten the variety in those reflections. And I see over here there's a bit of a continuation. So here I'm dragging a brush that's almost running out of paint, just to get a little bit in there. And I'm looking at these, and I'm looking up here, and I see that some of the white goes through, and I also see it's back to that darker value I had. And I'm going to grab more of that Smalt, S-M-A-L-T, Smalt blue. I'm going to make it a little more transparent. And I'm going to drag it right through what's already there, because I want it to read dark, but I also want it to read as though it's that surface of the water and there's some sense of transparency to it. So I just added, and it would be impossible probably in that distance with the phone to see this, but I can see a tiny bit of that bluish cast now, the purplish cast that went over top of what was there. I'm gonna just let this, a lot of this will be buried behind foliage, but still want to get it. See, it goes really yellow in there. Just gonna get the color out of my brush. I need a paper now. trying to just keep towel in my lap, paper towel, get most of that color out of the brush. I want it to be warmer, so you would be grabbing the primary yellow, barely a few hairs full of red, and getting that orange, and then mixing a tiny bit of the blue in. I'm going to go for those optional colors again. I'm grabbing that Indian yellow, and it's transparent already. So when I put it over here on my mixing palette, probably can't tell from there, but I can see through it. So I'm going to put some medium in it, but it's already transparent. And then I look up there, and I'm going to go for that green gold. So I have a very, okay, and that's transparent, it's brilliant, and I'm going to enhance these greens that are catching the light, because you can tell when you look at that image, whether you've printed the photo or you're using it off the screen, that there's definitely more light hitting in there. I could also take just barely white if I want it to be even more opaque. And if I do that, I might want to just brush it through. And I'm looking at sort of this whole zone. It gets there in the middle. It's definitely catching more light. If you go over those areas where I'd painted, or you'd painted some sky, and as I'm seeing in mine, it's going to turn those a brilliant green. Don't worry about it. One of the cool things about painting, like anything that probably you do with frequency, is sometimes the accidents or the unexpected are something that you really like. Okay, I hate to keep doing this. In fact, here, I'll use what you have, because I was just going to grab some of the pre-mixed cadmium orange, but I'm going to take a little bit of that red. Remember, that red is really strong. Some of the primary yellow, but a lot more primary yellow, and I got a really beautiful, brilliant orange there. If you look at my palette, I think you can see it. There's the cadmium orange. There's the orange I just mixed. So it's very similar. I'm going to grab a little bit of that green, a bit more, pull that into that orange, and then I'm going to just take a tiny bit of white. So I see that there's some brilliant flashes in that. That's reading too green, so I'm going to grab some of the brown, the umber, tiny bit of that white again. So I've used pretty much all that orange that I mixed. There we go. And I'm going to come back in where I had started putting some of that brown, and I'm going to just work some of those colors in here and there where that light is flashing through the shallow water, and it's illuminating the fact that you have that silty, muddy floor. And I'm almost imagining, if light's coming through, that what you're seeing is those areas where the silty bottom shows through are going to have a dappled kind of feel to them. And I see some really distinct ones in the middle, so I added a little bit more white to that. And some places where that light's really flashing in there and catching that sort of muddy bottom. So there we go. That might have to be my painting name, Muddy Bottoms. Okay, so that has a whole lot of color going on. It's like, wow, are you sure you want to do that with the water? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good for now. I'm looking, and the only thing I want to do now is go back into that light. I'm going to pull that over the entire surface. I'll show you in a minute, and then we're going to start working on the tree. So clean brush. I'm going to grab a nice brush load of white. So that's a titanium. That is a opaque white. They also make a transparent white called zinc white. I'm going to go over and grab just a little bit of that primary blue. I'm going to come back in and I'm just going to try to heighten where I want it. That's a little too white. So what I'm going to do is I'm grabbing just a tiny bit of the smalt, that purplish blue, and I'm going to take some more of that primary blue. Okay, so now I see more blue in it. Since I see that blue in the, and I'm going to enhance, yes. So I'm sort of looking at what I have up here on my photo, and I'm just using that to help guide how that light is hitting that water. If I get that brush really viscous, meaning a lot of that medium in it, I should be able to almost just flow so that I can, those are not all sort of even lines. I'm trying to keep a little bit of movement the way light moves through water. Again, the light is dappled too as it's coming through that tree, especially down in here. I'm trying to keep that kind of less than regular feel to it. And then I see it's really strong as it comes up. And it's really strong over here again. And I'm using some of them that's technically off where I taped, but I'm still using it for some of my reference. So now I'm going to take my brush once again. The option, if you didn't like to do this, is you can take a brush like this, one that has this very, that was wet, so brush like this, oh good. That already has this sort of open top, and you can just try to get the very tips of it wet. But I'm going to do my little thing because I like this. So now I'm going to drag this right through. So super, I mean, I'm barely touching that surface, but I want to stress that nice that slight curve that's happening there. Then I'm going to take one of the, and it can be any brush. I happen to grab one of these Egberts, and all I'm doing is just going right over that. I'm going to put it a little whiter. Some medium in, did it again, and I'm going to come back here because there's a lot of white, or a lot of this bright sky that is affecting these areas that are going to end up very much behind a lot of the leaves. So notice I'm not taking it completely across because it's sort of hitting through that foliage and not terribly regular how it's hitting. Okay, so I like that. And I'm going to put some of that lighter value over here. And this is where the reflection isn't as distinct. It's the sky, but there's a little movement in the water. So instead of using just those strokes that had a strong sort of vertical to them, I'm just bouncing the brush a little bit. And I'm using those tips to sort of help me stress that. The water has some movement, but at different places, the current is coming from different directions, so it has a little more of that almost dappled kind of movement to it. So now I look at that, I'm like, okay, that's not bad. For now, that might make me happy. I'm going to do something that I tend to do, but I tend to do this one of the last things I do, but I'm just going to show you. And that way, I'll probably do it again later anyway. So I'm back to that brush, got most of the color out, took some smalt just by itself. Okay, I'm going to take a tiny bit of that blue with it, a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, so as you notice, that's almost a lavendery. I can tell that that blue was in it. So you don't necessarily see that exact color. And then I'm going to take a nice brush load of water. I'm sorry, of glazing liquid. I know I'm not going to work this for long, so I'm picking up my gloss medium. I'm going to just put a little bit of that in there. This will dry fast and I don't want to work this too much, but I want it really transparent. All I'm going to do with this, I'm going to pick some places and I'm going to just very lightly drag that value right through. And I'm going to grab, you know what, I'm going to take a nice soft brush. I happen to grab a white sable. Any soft brush will do. I'm just going to come right back through where I did those. And sometimes if you don't like, if you want it to be a little more subtle, just go through the strokes two directions. Now this has that medium, so it's, or the gloss medium varnish, so it dries really fast, so I can't touch it anymore. Now, I don't know if you can see that added just a little bit of that glassiness to the surface. I'm gonna let that go for now. And I'm gonna stick a soaking wet brush right into my hand. Okay. Now, what do you do with all those greens? And my answer would be, we're gonna first just get the bulk of those, the sense of those leaves in. So I'm grabbing that one brush that I had. I've got tons, but you probably don't, so that's too small. I'll use that one I was just using. It's a nice script. A round would work. And I already have all that dark green mixed, yay. So I'm going to come and take a little bit more of the primary blue into it, a little bit more of the primary yellow into it, and I'm going to go and take some green gold. So I've got a nice green. I'm going to put a little bit of that black ink in with it. And then what I'm going to do first is, I see that you have a mass of dark leaves towards the center, and on the edges you're seeing through the dark leaves that are close to us and the light that's right behind it. There's really brilliant leaves. So I'm just going to take this while I have this nice dark value, and I'm going to just start. Once again, it depends, you might like to do it this way. So, and I'm not trying to make these each leaves, but I also don't want them just to feel, I mean, I want the strokes to have some relationship to what I'm painting. So I see that there's a lot of dark leaves close to that core. And I'm going to tend to paint them thinking how they come out from a branch and then they're weighted down and they move down. So, and I'm not finishing the painting. I'm just going to work some of those in. And I look and I say, I can get that a little bit darker. Ink and a little bit of that blue, especially for the core, which is really dark. So I don't want to lose everything, so I'm not going to all of a sudden just go through there and just paint so that I don't even know what's left anymore. Instead, I'm sort of working with the side of the brush. When it starts losing that, I reload it. So even though it looks like I'm just going like this, I'm getting the brush that it almost has that sort of shovel feel to it, and that way I can make strokes have that leaf-like pattern to them. Once again, I'm just going to work from the inside out. In between the branches, you're seeing layers of leaves, so I'm not letting everything cover all the branches. You want some of those branches to show. And again, I'm not gonna try to finish this. I'm just gonna see if I can get, so these branches are going this way, so they'd be carrying some leaves and then they're gonna tumble. Yeah, they're carrying leaves and then they're gonna move down. Here they're coming maybe foreshortened, meaning towards us. So those leaves might be carried on a branch that's coming towards us. So instead of down, that one's going sort of in these arcs away from up. And again, I would just do this for a while and get. Notice I'm not going the whole way out to the edges because we're gonna use a much brighter color first. It's easier to paint what's in the back first instead of what's in the front. So my color's running out. I'm getting some more yellow in there. Getting a little more green gold in there. Tiny bit more medium. Again, a lot more leaves between the branches. So when I'm in between the branches, I'm sort of bouncing. I don't want to lose all that sky color, but I want to get rid of, I don't want to have a lot of it. So here, there's tons of branches that are off, that are cropped off, but there's still leaves coming down, so I can actually do that kind of pattern in the back of these strong foreground branches. I can suggest that there are a lot of different leaves going into the back. So I would do a lot more of this, but you can get the idea. And I keep working that. While I have that color on my brush, I'm going to go ahead in. And here's where sometimes I'll even go the other direction because I see that there's a lot of grass close to this trunk of this tree, so I might just begin. A lot of it's brilliant green, but I'm going to just get some of that edge, the one that we painted right through. So I'm just going to get a little bit of this texture suggested for now. So I'm just roughing in. So don't worry if you're like, oh, that doesn't look like all the grass. How do I paint all those blades of grass? You're just suggesting it for now. I'm just making the first round over that foreground. So I'm not even gonna, it's just that I had that green and it was gonna be useful. So I went ahead and did it. Now I've got that green on there, but I want a really brilliant green for the branches that are leaning away from us and catching a lot of sun. So you could mix a lot of yellow and a little bit of the primary blue, or I just went right into my green gold, took a brush load of white into it. Well, I shouldn't say brush load, I took a little bit of white into it. And I'm looking over at that color and it's really brilliant. So I might just put a tiny bit of the primary blue or even grab a little of what I already had mixed. And now this is behind all of this. So I'm gonna just take that sand onto a much smaller brush. And what I'm gonna do is just go back there and suggest that there's gonna be a lot of leaves that you'll see through. Some of these darker and middle green foreground trees or leaves. But back where the light is catching really brightly, there's going to be a different kind of color that shows up. So I'm just going to work some of those right through, and I'm still trying to think how do leaves grow. So I'm not trying to paint a bunch of individual branches, but I'm also not just sort of painting a wall. And I look and I see that they show up the whole way down through, and depending on how, when you work with your brush, you'll get some kind of movement that makes sense to you, that conveys that basic idea of a leaf-like shape. Okay, so I'm just going to do that. And I tend to, if you've ever worked with digital media, there's a rubber stamp tool where you just basically can take this little tool and go over anything that you've worked with in an image and repeat it. So I just rubber stamped with my finger and moved that value, just faded it back a bit. Now I'm going to take a tiny bit of white and pick some really brilliant highlights, and I'm just going to highlight those a little bit. So I rubber stamped or blurred it a little bit. And now I'm going to pick some of those out. They're a little bit brighter again. And remember, we're going to paint a lot over these. So they're just going to sparkle through some of those different, the branches and the foliage, the boughs of foliage that are towards the front there. Okay, so I see when I look at this that some of those really brilliant lights are at the edge of branches that go the whole way down. So I'm just going to go ahead and bounce a little bit of that. Once again, now you can start to get a sense of what this is going to look like. So I've got this really, really, really light, almost a candy apple or extremely yellow green. I just took some of that primary cyan, the primary blue, and notice how artificial that looks. It's like, ooh, gaggo. So I took some of that darker green that I'd already mixed. Take a brush load of ink, because I want this to be bright, but I don't want it to look like the leaves are made of plastic. I'm gonna go to that, what does it matter with me that I'm stuck saying Indian yellow? I keep thinking Naples yellow, which is another historic color. So I'm gonna grab that Indian yellow, and I'm looking down, I'm like, okay, let's see. That's a pretty nice intermediate kind of, I tap it up there and I look, I'm like, ugh, no, it still feels, for me, it feels a little bit artificial. So I grabbed a brush load of that, I shouldn't say brush load, I grabbed a little bit of the umber, the brown, and now let's see. Okay, better. I just cut some of that plastic. So now I would just keep working, because you've got a variety of light that's getting into this canopy of leaves. So some are that brilliant light, others are this more medium, warm green, but nothing to the degree of that, those brilliant yellow greens that we were just using. So I'm going to go through this whole tree again, and I'm just going to keep, and notice down here, I do not want to cover everything up. So I'm adding a sense of those leaves that are coming off branches. And if you think, when leaves come off a branch, you'll have some that shoot to the side. So I had those darker ones there. I can just take and bring some off to the side of those. And go up here and do the same thing. So you could work with a variety of brushes. Right now I'm liking the stroke this brush is making, so I'm sort of sticking with it. And through here I can see still a lot of leaves. So I might just go through and really work some of that middle green through. Notice I'm just moving that brush in a lot of directions. There's so many leaves massed in some of these parts that I don't necessarily want them to all just be going in a either up like they're on a branch or down like they're tumbling down with the weight. When I get to one of those places, I'll do that, but okay, so I'm just going to move those. And there's fewer of those middle values in there because I'm seeing such a dense layered area of greens. And I'm sort of rushing this. I would be having more, I would actually be relaxed a little bit more, and I'm trying to not make you sit there for an hour while I just work through leaves, but so I see on these branches that extend and then there's little branches out there. So remember I said rubber stamp, the other thing you can do is just take this side of a big brush. So I'm picking up what I already put there and just softening it. And sometimes if you know you want a soft edge, so I want to suggest a mass of leaves. Maybe I don't want to have everything be quite so dark. Remember, there's a lot of leaves cropping off the top, so don't try to just stop this poor tree. So you see if I just bounce out a little bit, it's picking some of that wet paint up and just sort of moving it around. And I tend to do it with my finger most of the time, but feel free, whichever makes you more comfortable. Okay, I'm gonna grab more yellow. I'm gonna come into that green that we just had. I'm picking up everything off the edges. Okay, so I've got more of that green. It's a little bit lighter now. And I'm just gonna keep working. And again, there's less of it as I move in. And the movement of it is it's catching light, it's on branches, so you might as well try to study and see how is that working? And I see it coming sometimes sort of diagonally down. I'm gonna add ink, which tends to take things a little bit blue. This is a wildly toned color now because I had a pale color. I'm putting in one of the optional colors, which is a dark blue called Prussian blue. It would be like a lot of ink and a little bit of the primary blue. I want to get a dark shadow kind of green, blue green. Take a little bit more of that ink into it. And I'm going to now pull some more darks in here, but they're different from those original ones because they have more blue. They're a little cooler, so they're showing up. And I'm going to just pick, and you'll see when there's cooler, more blue greens get closer to the yellow greens, there's a distinct difference. The blue greens will read much more shadow. The yellow greens will read much more light. There's some kind of a bush or all kinds of vines or things growing close to that tree. So it is just covered with a variety of foliage down at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and just almost obscure those original branches. And notice I don't have much paint left on this brush, so I'm able to sort of bounce it in there, and I'm getting a suggestion of texture without covering everything up. So now it's slowly starting to feel a little bit more like what I might want. And I'm looking at what's there, and I'm looking down, and this is where we're gonna end this shortly because I want you to spend some time. But I'm gonna take I always pull a selection of brushes up here close to me. I'm just gonna take a smaller round, and I'm gonna grab a whole brush load of that green gold. I'm looking for a clean space, and I'm going to put some white into it. I've got this really brilliant green, and I'm going to come through that. And I'm just going to start suggesting in some places before I sort of go back in with some of these foreground greens. I'm going to pick out with some movement where those branches on the back going away from me out into the sort of middle ground of this might be catching that brilliant color again, because some of that got blurred. And I'm looking on here and I can see, and actually this tree has all leaves that tend to aim down. So as I'm doing that, as I'm sort of picking some of those back out, I'm even using strokes that are going down. So the more you paint, the harder it is to keep suggesting those brilliant lights, the backlighting, where things that are behind the darker values of the foreground are light without sort of painting all of them out. So now I'm getting better sense looking at this where these different branches are going to be. So I didn't do anything, didn't bring any intermediate greens out there yet, but I know I will. So now I'm taking some in the back, and I'm actually taking a different direction, as though you're looking at a branch that has foliage going up, or right here you're seeing a branch closest to us where that is sort of going down. I did a little bit of that there. And there's just places where I can see little lights that flex through. And there's other places at the very end where there's going to be lights at the branches coming closest to us, where they're picking out some light too. But for now, oops, okay. So I might say for now, if you get it to sort of that kind of a place, I have a brush load of this brilliant green, and I see there's all kinds of dappled greens down here. So I'll just go ahead and I'll just start to suggest. So for example, if I know that there's going to be a variety of light catching its different places, I just start to move some of that in. I'm going to take one of those big old messy brushes that I like. The ones laying in front of me are wet and I want it dry. So I'm just going to take these and sort of pull those strokes I just put on there up a little bit. So if I wanted that to feel more like, oops, I just stuck my hands in completely wet paint. And I would have flipped it upside down, so I could do this. And remember, you're going to keep painting on this. I figured since I have that light color, nice brilliant green, I'll just start to suggest where I see that really brilliant sort of dappled light coming through the grass. Voila. You can now see your painting starting to happen. So work through that, and I'll do at least one more of these before we meet again next Thursday, okay? So that just took us through, we had the underpainting, we worked on the background and just establishing the plane of the water with some basic sense of light. We came in and we refined that light dramatically on the water, added a little bit of modulation or variety of value into the background. And then now we started to actually think about what is the mass of the leaves in this strong middle and almost leaning into foreground tree itself. So work on that tree, and when we come back, we're going to work more on the tree. We're going to do a little bit with this because there's some leaves in that tree as well. And then we're getting closer to the sort of the end of the painting. We're going to work on this, we'll start down in here, and then probably one more, just refine the whole thing, kind of go over. So work on that tree as much as you feel comfortable doing.